The 20th century businessman and motivational speaker W. Clement Stone once famously coined the phrase, "Big doors swing on small hinges." This is the thought that seemingly small and insignificant actions can have consequential effects. As we turn to Esther chapter 6, we now come to the centre of the story concerning Haman's plot against the Jewish people in the Persian kingdom. With the king's permission, he has decreed the execution of every Jewish man, woman, and child. It will take place 1 year from his decree, but there is still something that continues to nag at him, something that continues to bother him. His personal rival, Mordecai the Jew, is still alive, is still sitting in the king's gate as one of the king's officials, and will still not give him the honour he believes he is worthy of having. So after consulting with his family, his wife Zeresh, and his friends, just after the feast, he has decided that Mordecai must die tomorrow. He cannot wait a year. He must do it soon, and then he can go to the feast that Esther had prepared on the second day and enjoy himself. But now we see that one sleepless night results in the salvation of not only Mordecai, but every Jew living in Persia. Let's look at this episode in the story of Esther, and I want you to see three main things. Firstly, notice the haunting of Ahasuerus. The haunting of Ahasuerus in verses 1 to 3. The king had returned from an enjoyable feast put on by his beloved wife, Queen Esther, for both he and his right-hand man, Haman. The feast went so well that during it, the king had offered his wife anything that she wanted, even offering him up to half of his kingdom. No small offer for a Persian king to give. But she left him with no answer. She left him hanging. She hadn't responded. And she instead promised that if he came to the feast the following day, then she would make her request as to what he could give to her in order to show his generosity, his benevolence to his queen, something that Persian kings love to do. Show their benevolence. I think they thought it might have scratched out some of their cruelties. But in Esther 6, verse 1, we now find the king not at a banquet, but alone. Alone at home, with only his thoughts for company. And it's here we discover that he both loses something and finds something while he's alone in that bedroom. Notice what he lost, verse 1. We read, "On that night the king could not sleep." He could not sleep. Perhaps haunted by the lack of an answer from Esther. We can imagine him, can't we, wondering what sort of request Esther's going to make that requires 2 feasts. Had she some plan that actually she might just take him up on his offer to take half of his kingdom? I think this is the most logical explanation for the reason that he cannot sleep at night. Perhaps somewhat regretting so quickly offering Esther so much. We've all had nights like Ahasuerus, haven't we? When we've been robbed of sleep with overactive imaginations and worrying, anxious thoughts about tomorrow. But actually there's more to it than that. Ahasuerus was unable to sleep because God was the one keeping him up. In the Greek translations of the Old Testament, the scribes decided to wrongly but instinctively translate verse 1 as God had caused sleep to flee from him. That's not in the Hebrew Masoretic text. It's not in the original. But I think the Greek scribes had an instinct there that was theological. That God was here. His fingerprints can be seen in verse 1 of chapter 6. A God who is able to peer into the bedroom of a king, of the most powerful man in the known world at that time, and steal his sleep away from him. Keep him up at night. But then he found something, verse 2 to 3. Verse 1, he gave orders to bring the book of memorial deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king, and it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hold on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this?" The king's men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So we get a little bit more information. Ahasuerus is not completely alone in his palace. He has attendants with him at all times. Perhaps not the most important attendants, such as Haman or even Mordecai himself, but he has attendants who are there to do whatever he needs done at whatever hour he needs it done. And we're told that he's called for the book of memorable acts to be read to him by one of his servants. What is the book of memorable acts? Well, it's exactly as it says. It's a book that recorded memorable actions that pleased the king. And so he finds there something that, perhaps he had been hoping that this would send him to sleep. Perhaps, those of us who struggle a little bit more with history might find ourselves on a sleepless night turning to a boring documentary on history, or perhaps a podcast, or even opening a book and we slowly get sent to sleep. If you've never tried it, try it. Unless you're really interested in history, I'm looking at a couple of people, then it won't do you any good. I think Ahasuerus was expecting nothing to come to his attention, that this book would send him off to sleep. Instead, it makes him more alert than he was before. Because he reads about how Mordecai, one of the officials sitting in the king's gate, had rescued King Ahasuerus from a life-threatening situation, a life-threatening conspiracy from two of his doorkeepers. And worse still, he had never repaid Mordecai for that good deed. Now, why is that important? Well, just as I said, Persian kings enjoyed showing people just how generous they were. So if an official did something that was of significance, such as saving the king's life, then it was expected that the Persian king would reward them in the public elaborately, generously, showing to all just how benevolent they were. It was a matter of pride. And so he asks, what has been done? And his attendant, to honour him, and his attendants can say immediately, nothing. Why do they know with such certainty? Because nothing has been recorded. And that would be very unusual. It's not that there's been an oversight. It's not that they didn't bother recording it. If it's not in the book, it's because he wasn't honoured. We need to remember here the context of Esther 6. Mordecai had been in mourning for the Jewish people since the decree had been issued. Haman plans to hang Mordecai the following day. It seems there's nothing Mordecai can do but wait on the Lord to do something extraordinary. Instead, mark this, the Lord reveals his power in the ordinary, giving the king a sleepless night. How ordinary is that? How common is that? I asked, haven't we all had that sort of experience? And you all nodded to one degree or another. But I could see on your faces, you've been there. It is a common experience. And yet the Lord used what was common, what was ordinary, what we think is insignificant, to change the entire direction of the book of Esther. When we feel there is nothing in the world we can do, will we follow Mordecai's example and just wait on the Lord? Pray to the Lord. Look and trust in the Lord who will act. We might not be able to reach high and powerful places, but the sovereign Lord can. He is able to use something as simple as sleeplessness to change the fortunes of his people. But then secondly, notice the honouring of Mordecai. The honouring of Mordecai in verses 4 to 11. Because while sleep has abandoned Ahasuerus, it appears that Haman has abandoned his sleep. Look at verse 4. And the king said, "Who is in the court? What top advisor is here?" Ahasuerus, by the way, never acts without asking for advice. He is pictured in the book of Esther as a complete headless king. I think as Peter told us right at the beginning. He really lacks wisdom. He can't make a decision for himself. So even in this matter, who's in the court? Bring a top official. And remember, this is a time of the morning that most of the top officials wouldn't be there. So who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Haman is there. Haman has come early. And why has Haman come early? Haman has come early in the hope to be the first person to speak with the king about Mordecai. And his plans succeed. He is the first person in the court who is able to see the king and talk to him about Mordecai, though he doesn't quite know it. Because Haman, to his delight, he's right there in the right place. As soon as he arrived, Ahasuerus summoned Haman into his presence and asks for his counsel. And without any explanation of the person he's talking about, he asks Haman, "What do I do with a person who I delight to honour?" You should laugh, by the way. Many of the commentators, and some of the most orthodox commentators, say that this chapter is one of the funniest chapters in the Bible. God does scoff at the world's wicked wisdom. And there's nothing wrong with you doing that either, in the right portion. This is amusing. It's meant to be. It was written to be. And so, without having any idea of who the king would delight to honour, I mean, did you notice? Hey, there's not a moment in Haman's head when he doesn't wonder whether the king is speaking about him. Of course he's talking about me. Why wouldn't he be talking about me? Who would he like to delight more than me? There's no one. I even got invited to his wife's feast. And if we doubted Haman's pride before, then now we can be left in no doubt by his response to the king. Effectively, he tells Ahasuerus to treat this person whom the king delights to honour as though he himself is royalty. Haman has been promoted above all the noble officials of the Persian kingdom except for Ahasuerus himself. And now what does he want? Haman said to the king, verse 9, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble servants. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Dress me up as a king. But little did he know he was the wrong person. Can you imagine Haman's face when, after detailing exactly what the king should do for the person the king delights to honor, Ahasuerus tells him everything he said should happen to Mordecai the Jew? And who is higher ranking and a more noble servant of the king to do this for Mordecai but Haman? He had wanted to speak to the king about Mordecai. He spoke to the king about Mordecai, but it didn't go the way he had planned. Instead of hanging him, Haman now parades him through the streets, honoring him. Is this not the first fruits of God's vindication of faithful Mordecai and of Haman's downfall? Because we see here that our God can not only turn the hearts of kings, but he can arrange the most, or perhaps the smallest coincidence. Because didn't you notice, it just so happened that the king had turned to the book of memorable acts to help him sleep. And it just so happened that he had read to him about how Mordecai had not been honored for his loyalty some 3 years before. And it just so happened that Haman went to the king's court that morning before anyone else arrived, while Mordecai was on the king's mind. And it just so happened that the king made no mention of Mordecai and appealed to Haman's ego. And it just so happened in the sovereign plans and purposes of God that this would be so for the salvation of his people. I hope you realize there's no such thing as coincidences. Oh, we call them coincidences, but I hope your theology is mature enough that you would see that those coincidences are providences, that it is God behind them. The world thinks coincidence, it just happened and it just worked out and it did it all by itself. We know better. There is a God behind even the smallest coincidence. Have eyes of faith, walk by faith, not by sight. But then finally notice the humiliation of Haman. The humiliation of Haman in verses 12 to 14. Now the only thing that we're told about Mordecai following this elaborate parade is in verse 12. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Faithful Mordecai. Faithful Mordecai. Unlike Haman, this was not a man who allowed any honor that he received, however grand, however big, to puff him up and to distract him from the jobs that he had to do. He was a humble man. Haman, when he was honored by the king, wanted all the officials to bow down to him at the king's order. But Mordecai simply gets on with his routine. Doesn't make a big thing of it. Doesn't boast. Haman went and boasted to his friends and family when he was invited to Queen Esther's feast. Mordecai doesn't do that. Faithful Mordecai. But in contrast, what do we read about Haman? Well, verse 12, he was a forlorn man. A forlorn man. This whole event was a cause of shame and embarrassment for Haman. He skulked away. Mordecai had been mourning for the Jewish people. Haman mourns for himself. Mordecai covered his head in ashes for the Jewish men, women, and children. Haman covers his head in shame. Here is a man whose ego has been dented, whose puffed up chest has been deflated by the events of the morning. And his only comfort now are the friends and family who had arguably got him in this mess in the first place. But as he runs home to them, in verses 13 to 14, we see he was a fooling man. Because if he was hoping for a friendly welcome home, Haman had more disappointment coming. Perhaps ironically, maybe tauntingly so, the narrator now refers to his friends not as his friends, but as his wise men. They are as comforting and as wise as Job's counselors. Hearing what has happened, instead of saying, "Oh, you should build a big gallows, bigger than anyone's ever seen, and hang Mordecai, your enemy, on it, and everyone will know that you're boss," they now speak about Mordecai as though they'd never heard of him. If Mordecai really is a Jew, what are they doing? Commentators get confused about this. I think it's I think if you have studied human nature, and if you certainly have studied politics, you certainly know what's happening here. They are distancing themselves from this man. Mordecai, I don't know. I've never heard of Mordecai. No one's ever mentioned him to me. A plot to kill him? No, not me. We see how the elites do it like this, don't we? If I can be cheeky for a minute. I've been caught. I didn't have anything to do with it. Not me. And so they say, well, this Mordecai, if he's a Jew, you're a dead man. You can't win against him. Why are they saying that? Could it be that they actually had an understanding of the gods that Mordecai worshipped? Can it be that in their education they understood something of the history of the Jewish people? In the Hebrew, they refer to Mordecai not as a Jew, but as one of the seed. Maybe alluding to God's promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, and then Genesis chapter 15 also, where he says, "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." You see, there had been pharaohs, and there had been kings, and there had been nations who had sought to destroy God's people, and again and again and again the Lord had protected them, and they themselves had been destroyed. Here is a foretaste of the victory that was to come for the Jewish people in the time of Esther. Not in a miraculous or spectacular way, but through the passing of ordinary events. And can I say, this is how God often works in our lives, using seemingly insignificant moments for our good and for his glory. Don't despise the ordinary. Don't despise the mundane. Because it may be when God seems most distant that he is actually most near. It may be that when God seems most silent, he is most active. When it comes to the work of God in your life, remember, big doors swing on small hinges. But these events weren't only a foretaste of the Jews' salvation, but of a greater salvation to come. The salvation not won by Mordecai, but a salvation won by the Lord Jesus Christ. Like Mordecai, Jesus did not seek his own welfare. He sought the welfare of those who would trust in him. Like Mordecai, wicked men sought to kill Jesus unfairly, unjustly, only for him in the end to be exalted over them. And like Mordecai, Jesus' victory over sin and death secures our own victory over the grave. In Mordecai, because Mordecai was honoured, the Jews will later be honoured. And brothers and sisters, because Jesus Christ has risen and has ascended to the right hand of God, one day you likewise will follow. So believe in him. So follow him in the ordinary and trust in him when you're not sure where he is or how he's working, knowing that he is the God of coincidences. He's the God of hinges for big doors. Amen.